Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 91st episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. And today I'm going to be talking about empathy at work. For many people in the UK, we are transitioning back to a hybrid style of workplace. Working at home some days and being able to connect with colleagues in an office environment or similar. Communicating is going to be imperative. Everyone will have had a different experience and journey of lockdown, COVID, homeschooling, supporting others, and perhaps want this to be acknowledged in the workplace. Therefore, it's vital for workplaces and all staff to be aware and mindful of communication, conversation, and support. So to join me talking about this further is expert Shola Kaye. Shola Kaye is the author of 2 books and an award-winning international speaker on communication, inclusive leadership, and empathy. That's why she's perfect for today. She's passionate about helping organizations create an atmosphere of belonging for their people and for those individuals in turn to be given the skills and opportunity to communicate with power and clarity. Shola's Empathy to Equity Blueprint program helps organizations improve staff inclusion and engagement. When individuals have the confidence and tools to share their brilliance, amazing things happen. People are transformed into leaders and teams and groups perform better. Everyone gains, everyone's a winner. Shola has appeared in a variety of industrial journals. She's a LinkedIn learning instructor and her clients include the United Nations and Deloitte. She has a degree in natural sciences from Cambridge University, completed scientific research in the field of neuroscience at the US Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, and spent a number of years working in the United States in financial services. So I'm so delighted and honoured to have her with us today. Welcome, Shola Kaye, to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, Layla.
Oh, we're so delighted that you could join us today. And I was hoping that you could start by telling the listeners, this term, empathy at work, what does it look like? What does it feel like when it's going well in the workplace?
Yeah, well, empathy, a huge part of it is listening, because most people know what the definition is of empathy, which is the ability to understand the feelings of another person. And actually, Michelle Obama has a really nice definition, which is it's the understanding that other people's feelings and points of view count. So however you look at it, it's really about understanding other people, and you can't really do that unless you listen. So being able to ask questions, being able to, even if it's on a virtual meeting, perhaps there might be a lot of people in the virtual room, but it's just asking a question at the beginning that gets people sharing, whether it's a traffic light, how are you feeling about this project, red, yellow, green. Even that, although it's not a kind of deep connection, it's still showing that you care and that you're willing to respond to the feelings and the thoughts and feelings of the people that you're communicating with.
And I love what you said about listening, because often people go to work to find solutions and they just desperately want to jump in, and we miss so much by not listening. And I do think that certain cultures nourish that listening and other cultures are all about, go for the win and get yourself in there. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's mainly I operate in the workplace, and so I'm finding that it's very much around the leaders who struggle the most with the listening, because they're so used to being asked to fix it and just come up with a solution that they often have sort of knee-jerk responses to the things that they hear, and people that are speaking tend to feel cut off or feel not really valued, because there's this sort of very quick response that isn't taking fully into account all that they have to say. And then sort of from a cultural perspective, it's interesting. My family is Nigerian, and there's very much in it from that perspective, and I have respect for elders, but just very much, if you're younger, just be quiet, because it's all about it's very patriarchal in my family, at least. So, whatever the sort of male members of the family say that's what goes. Even with my brother, for example, he kind of gets more attention from my parents than and is listened to more than perhaps the daughters are. And so yeah, it's an interesting one because empathy does cross over, and it's so important, but there's a lot of people that don't really listen or discount the views of others.
And so how did you become an expert on empathy at work, Shola? What was your journey? How did you develop this area of work?
Well, for me, it started out with my own experience in the workplace many years ago. So I originally worked, my first corporate job was in the States, and I was working for an IT company, and I didn't have much experience at IT. I was hired, to sort of come in and learn. But as a lot of us know, when we're sort of people of color, minorities, there are certain stereotypes that prevail around us. And because I was struggling a bit, I was being asked to code. I'd never coded before. This is my first corporate job. And so I was struggling a bit and needed some support. And I think my managers and the managing director of the company, the interpretation was, oh, either she's lazy or she's incapable. And as a lot of us people of color know, there are these stereotypes, like assumption of criminality if you're black, or if you're, for example, Asian, you're not from here. So a lot of these stereotypes do play into the way that our behavior is interpreted in the workplace. And so I found myself called into the managing director's office, and I was thinking, oh, perhaps they'll give me a mentor or they'll send me to some training. And the first thing they said was, well, you're being put on probation. And there'd been no feedback, no, like, oh, well, we're a bit concerned, what can we do? That was just the first I'd heard that, they weren't happy. So this, I think at the time I very much internalized the whole thing, and I just thought, well, I was an awful employee. And we managed to turn it around and stayed at that company for many more years, but I just thought it was me, I was rubbish, and I should have figured things out for myself. But it was only later on that I was talking to people, and they said, well, that was a distinct lack of empathy that was shown. No listening, no interest in understanding your situation, no desire to even develop you as an employee. And so thinking about it from that perspective, I had an opportunity to do a TEDx talk, and I spoke about empathy in the workplace, and I spoke about how millennials these days, and just in general, how people are demanding much more empathetic behavior from their bosses and their managers. And so that kind of snowballed from there. So having done that TEDx talk, then I got more and more opportunities to speak about empathy and to do consulting on it and keynotes and so on.
That's so exciting. And it's so brilliant the way you turned that it's kind of frightening, isn't it? When you get called into someone's office and I don't know how they spoke to you, but even the message that they delivered and the way it was delivered, and you were able to flip that round, not only for yourself personally, but to be able to talk about that and encourage others and workplaces to think about empathy in a holistic way.
Yeah, it's amazing because, I guess I'm fortunate that I'm not employed by a company. I'm self-employed now, so I can freely share the story of what happened to me. And every single time I do, there are always, whether it's women, people of color, there are always people that speak up and say, yes, that happened to me, or, oh, I saw that happen. But of course, people can't, if you're employed, you've got to be careful about what you say. So I'm kind of happy that, well, not happy, but grateful for the experience that I had. And as you say, by sharing that helps other people to feel that they can offload a little bit themselves, and there are other people that it happened to. It wasn't just them.
And if organizations are listening, staff members that might have experienced it, but there might be some people, listeners, who are saying, right, well, I'm actually quite senior in my company and I think we're empathetic, but I'm not really sure. How would someone know if the workplace or their area or their team or department was truly empathetic? What are the key indicators of this in the workplace?
Well, it's interesting. There was a study that came out I think just last month, actually. It was a HR consultant in the States called Josh Bersin, and he looked at a lot of the DEI strategies and initiatives that companies put into place. And I think he looked at like 80 plus different interventions, and he said that the most popular and the most successful one was when companies they regularly listen to their employees, and then they actually hear what's being said and they act upon it. And he said that that's more useful and more productive than things like anonymizing resumes. A lot of the interventions that we see companies do, unconscious bias training, all of those things, it really does go back to just simple listening and really caring and trying to implement. So for me, an empathetic organization is one where there is that openness on the part of managers and senior managers to really listen to the experiences of their employees and to really try and implement, because it's all very well to listen. And you get a lot of these sort of listening sessions now where you're asking minority employees to kind of expose themselves really and kind of, bare their soul and share what's going on for them. And then nothing happens. And those employees can really feel betrayed because they've exposed themselves, they've really been vulnerable, and then, it's been to no effect whatsoever. So I think it starts with the listening. It starts with sharing that you really care what your employees think and you want to make the organization better. And I've got a client in California who's great on that, in that they really want, they don't really know what exactly they need to be doing, but they're committed to becoming an anti-racist organization, and they just want to learn, to grow, to do whatever it takes to keep moving in that direction. And I think it's that openness to say, well, we're not really sure, we've tried these things or we haven't tried anything yet, but we really want to hear from you. What are your grievances? What are the challenges? What's stopping you right now from bringing your whole self and being your best self in the workplace? And then having that conversation around, okay, well, what can we do next? What's systemic, what's societal, what can we fix easily, and how, what's harder, but we'll work on it. So it's not easy. I mean, although it sounds simple to listen and then put that into play, it's not easy at all. And obviously you've got competing people in the workplace, some people who are pushing forward for progress, others who want it to stay as it is. So it's hard to keep everybody happy, of course, but I think it's just that commitment to be open to learning, and even to say with humility, look, I'm really grateful to you for what you've just shared with me. I don't have a ready answer for you right now, but I will loop back with you when we've discussed this in the senior team or with other managers. We'll loop back, we'll talk again. Just trust that I've heard you, and that I'm committed to taking some sort of next action, although I'm not sure what it is right now.
And you're so right about the listening groups that most organizations have had, and how so many global majority staff have opened themselves up to feel, finally I'm being listened to, and it's desperately vulnerable, and it's quite a scary place because many of us don't necessarily feel that safe in the workplace. It might be a case of, oh my goodness, can I really speak freely because I don't know what's going to be used against me or changed, and then to have no action done is truly devastating.
Absolutely. And so you have people just, I'll keep a low profile, keep my head down, just do what I can to stay in the job and succeed as best I can, but not fully committed to that organization anymore.
No. What are the barriers that stop people listening actively? What do you think? What have you seen? And in your experience, why is it so difficult for people to listen actively and passionately?
There's a number of reasons, I think. Well, first of all, and I always ask this whenever I do an empathy workshop, and a lot of answers come back, and they are things like there's no time, or we've got project pressure, so there's no time to sort of uh, relax, and because it takes time. You can't just rush people and say, well, you've got 30 seconds, just tell me now. That doesn't work. So yeah, you need time, you need space, you need to have enough compassion within you that you can listen and then really reflect on what you're hearing. So yeah, the time, the space, the resources. Also, it's about having the courage, because I think especially if you're a manager, and maybe more so with junior managers than really senior ones, but if you're a manager and you're just trying to get by, and do the best you can, and then you're being expected to listen, and you're afraid that you may hear something that's not particularly complimentary about your management skills, then people are going to close their those managers will probably not be up for listening, because it takes humility, it takes vulnerability, it takes courage, and it takes an attitude of like a growth mentality, really, to say, well, okay, yeah, I take that on board. I'll try and incorporate that going forward. And a lot of people aren't big enough. That sounds harsh, but people aren't necessarily big enough to have, or maybe there's a competitive element in the company and people aren't allowed to be in that position where they can just sort of reflect and really own up to, yeah, okay, I need to do better. So things like that. Hierarchy is another one as well, where there's that kind of inflexibility. You can't, if you're somebody who's perhaps on a team or an individual contributor, it's very hard for you to actually share with management what you're thinking. So yeah, there's quite as you can hear, it's quite a long list.
You're spot on. Of course, you're spot on, but it's spot on about time, and I've seen that as well. We need to hire these people yesterday. We don't have time to think about biases. We don't have time to think about questions for potential, rather than looking at the opportunity someone may have had. And it's not helping. And yet there's so much information out there. And I still, that we were talking, weren't we, Shola, that it's great that we're busy, but we shouldn't really be busy in an ideal world, and how there's so much work to do.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's tough, because some of the work is so heartbreaking, but you just have to stay the course, really. But it's not necessarily an easy job, to be honest.
No, so what can workplaces do to embed empathy in the way that you've described, and how they work, and how do you help them with that?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of things that companies can do, and it is heartening to see companies trying different things. And it's sometimes what might work for one organization may not work for another. So I think you've got to have that attitude of it's not necessarily that you're experimenting, but you're open to seeing if it works or not, and then just keep trying until you find the right solution. Yeah, I think the first one, as I say, is listening, and it might be having some sort of proximity session where you can have like the town hall type situations where you have everybody there and a few people sharing, or some of the clients that I've got have organized proximity sessions where they may have senior management, and then they'll select perhaps one individual who's got something to share. Maybe they're LGBTQ, or somebody else is a person of color, and so they're sharing with the management in a kind of more sheltered way, if you like, so not exposing themselves to the entire company. So that's one thing that I see happening a lot. And again, it's about what happens next, but I think even that senior management are taking time out to listen is a good thing. Then from the perspective of virtual meetings, I sort of talked about a few strategies already when you've got a bigger group, but it could be even things like rotating meeting the person who's running a meeting, because different people that run meetings will elicit different responses from the people who are attendees. So it's I think a lot of it's about managers understanding that they don't have to have the answer to everything, and being open to not only feedback but also more participation from the people in their teams. And through that participation and through that sort of diverse way of doing things, it will allow people to show more of themselves, or to reflect in different ways. So I think things like that, running equitable meetings, because it's been shown as well that when you have one or two people that dominate the meeting, the team doesn't flourish, because you get people whose ideas are suppressed. So it could be around running equitable meetings, making sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. There's a lot of things, circulating agendas ahead of time, so people, it's just really about making sure that people get a chance to share their ideas fully and feel that they're being respected and listened to.
So it's rooted in inclusive practice, like we'd say for any protected characteristics, common human decency, how we'd want our colleagues to respect us. It's all rooted in that as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I mean, I think empathy is wonderful because it has an impact on so many different areas of our working lives. So, there's the productivity side of it. There's the engagement. There's of course diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's then innovation as well, because if you can take the perspective of somebody else, of maybe a client or a colleague, that means you can put yourself in their position and come up with better solutions. So it does touch a lot of different areas.
And this work it's full on and it's draining, as you said, the heartbreaking stories. So Shola, what do you do to look after your own mental health and well-being? And what are your top 3 tips that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, for me, I think everyone's different, but for me, what helped a lot was when I came off Facebook, because I do social media, but I'm more on LinkedIn, and I just use it very much for work. But I think it's very easy to get, you're looking at what everyone else is doing, and you sort of start to get into sort of comparisonitis. So for me, just really limiting social media was very, very helpful. As I say, I can't completely eradicate it, but I try and really put a box around it. And then things like meditation, mindfulness is really important. I mean, I'm kind of a bit of a dreamer, I guess, so I kind of like to have time where that's not assigned, I'm not necessarily working, I'm not doing much, but just kind of doing a bit of daydreaming or just dawdling around. I mean, that's a big one for me. And I think if I don't have that time, then I feel like I'm not living the life that I want to fully. And then things like sport as well. But I think it's so important to fill your cup, especially doing this sort of work, because you don't want to have compassion fatigue. You don't want to feel that you're being burned out. So whatever it is that works for you, whether it's scheduling it in your diary, whether it's just making time every day on a regular basis, but it's so important.
Thank you. And I always love our guest tips. Everyone has different things that they do, so it's fascinating to hear. And finally, if people want to know more about you and your work, and I really hope they do, please do check out Shola's work. She is phenomenal. And I'll include the links in the show notes, Shola, but where should they go? How should they contact you and find you?
Well, a couple of ways. Either come to my website, which is sholakaye.com, Kaye, or you can go to LinkedIn, and I'm there as well. So, please reach out. I'm always on LinkedIn multiple times every day. So, reach out, say that you listen to Layla's podcast and you'd love to get in touch. And that would be brilliant.
Fantastic. And that has been a really helpful walk around and dive into empathy at work, what it looks like, what organizations can do. So we thank you again so much for your time and your wisdom and your insights, Shola.
Thank you, Layla. It's been fantastic being here, and you're doing so well with your podcast. So just keep up the great work.
Oh, that's really kind. And we'll see you in the next episode, listeners. So don't forget to join us next week. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.